The courtroom was silent, yet the air trembled with tension. Cameras flashed outside, reporters scribbled furiously, and a crowd of spectators leaned forward as if history itself was about to deliver a verdict. At the center of it all sat D4vd. Not a politician, not a world leader, but a man whose trial had ignited headlines across the nation. Some called him a criminal mastermind, others insisted he was an innocent scapegoat. But one question echoed louder than any gavel. Was D4vd guilty, or was he framed? This was no ordinary case. Hidden behind the legal jargon and courtroom rituals were secrets that cut deep into human morality. Evidence appeared, then vanished. Witnesses contradicted themselves, and looming over it all were two men. Furious, relentless, and unwilling to compromise. They weren't lawyers or judges. They were ordinary jurors, yet their anger and determination shaped the direction of the trial more than anyone else. Two angry men, locked in a battle of principle and pride, turned this case into something bigger than a man's fate. It became a mirror reflecting the fragility of justice. What unfolded inside those walls was not just a trial. It was a storm of accusation, betrayal, and doubt. This is the story of the D4vd trial, where truth was a shadow and justice was anything but certain. A story that leaves us asking, when the system trembles, do we uncover guilt or witness the making of a tragedy? The story of the D4vd trial did not begin inside a courtroom. It began long before the first juror was sworn in the streets where whispers grew louder than evidence and rumors traveled faster than truth. D4vd, a name that, until the case, belonged to little more than a rising figure on the fringes of society. To some, he was a misunderstood artist, a voice of his generation who blurred the line between music, street culture, and raw emotion. To others, he was a troubled man with connections too dark to ignore. His very identity became part of the trial. Was he a dreamer caught in the wrong place at the wrong time, or a manipulator who had long hidden behind charisma and creativity? The crime that dragged him into the spotlight was brutal, puzzling, and unforgettable. A prominent businessman was found dead under mysterious circumstances. The police investigation was messy from the start. Timelines contradicted each other, surveillance tapes went missing, and the few witnesses available were hesitant to speak. Yet through this fog of uncertainty, one name surfaced again and again: D4vd. How had his name entered the file? Some claimed he had been seen near the scene that night. Others insisted his music contained veiled confessions, lines that prosecutors would later play in court as though lyrics were fingerprints. Still others whispered about rivalries, debts, and hidden networks that stretched far beyond the trial. The media pounced. Headlines screamed of betrayal and guilt, while tabloid shows cast him as either a monster or a martyr. The court of public opinion was swift, harsh, and divided. For every fan who raised a sign reading "Free D4vd", there was another who demanded justice for a life lost. But what truly set this case apart was not just the identity of the accused, but the cracks it revealed in the justice system itself. Prosecutors appeared overconfident, brandishing circumstantial evidence as if it were ironclad proof. Defense lawyers countered with claims of conspiracy, painting their client as a victim of manipulation and corruption. Behind closed doors, law enforcement officers argued among themselves. Some believed the evidence was too fragile to support the charges. Others pushed for a conviction at all costs, fearing the public backlash if D4vd walked free. The case was no longer about just one man. It had become a test of credibility for the entire system, and then came the jury. Ordinary citizens pulled from their lives to decide the fate of a man the world was watching. 12 individuals, each carrying personal beliefs, biases, and fears. Among them were two men whose anger, raw, unrelenting, and explosive, would soon ignite conflict inside the deliberation room. But in this first chapter, they sat quietly, listening, their expressions betraying little. Their storm had yet to break. As the trial opened, the prosecution delivered a chilling narrative. D4vd had motive, opportunity, and a violent streak hidden beneath his fame. They painted him as a master manipulator who had fooled the public for too long. The defense countered with equal force. No direct evidence tied him to the crime, and every piece of circumstantial proof could be explained away. The audience in the gallery was spellbound. Reporters captured every gasp, every objection, every raised voice. Nightly broadcasts replayed the proceedings, with analysts arguing not only about guilt but about the deeper implications: class, fame, race, and the weaponization of public perception. By the end of the first week, It was clear that this was not just a trial. It was a stage. The world was watching, and every player knew it. The lawyers sharpened their words like knives. The judge struggled to maintain order as emotions boiled over. And D4vd himself, dressed in muted suits, sat silently, his expression unreadable. Was it the face of a guilty man hiding his crimes, or the mask of someone already condemned by the world, fighting to keep fragments of dignity intact? Part 1 of this story is not about verdicts or angry debates. It is about the setting of a storm, the moment before lightning strikes. It is about how a man, a crime, and a divided society collided in one courtroom. And as the first pieces of evidence were presented, as the jury took notes and the spectators leaned forward, a sense of inevitability filled the room. This would not be a straightforward trial. It would be a reckoning. And the true battle was only beginning. When the trial of D4vd entered its second act, the atmosphere inside the courtroom shifted. What had begun as a slow march of testimonies and procedural arguments quickly transformed into a battlefield where every word could decide a man's future. The prosecution leaned heavily on circumstantial evidence, grainy surveillance footage, ambiguous witness statements, and a timeline that seemed stitched together with guesswork rather than certainty. The defense countered by shredding each point, arguing that coincidence had been twisted into guilt and perception had been forged into proof. But beyond the polished speeches of lawyers, another story was unfolding, inside the minds of 12 ordinary people tasked with delivering justice. Jurors are supposed to be impartial, the embodiment of reason and fairness. Yet in reality, they carry their fears, frustrations, and prejudices into the deliberation room. And in this trial, 2 men stood out, men whose anger became both the fuel and the obstacle of the proceedings. The first of the angry men was Thomas Riker, a factory foreman hardened by decades of labor disputes and broken promises. To him, the world was divided between predators and prey, winners and victims. From the first day he looked at D4vd, he saw not a misunderstood artist but a manipulator who needed to be punished. Riker's eyes burned with suspicion during every testimony. His notes filled not with questions but with exclamation marks. The second was Marcus Hale, a former schoolteacher whose career had ended in bitterness after a scandal involving false accusations. To Hale, the trial was not just about D4vd. It was about a system that had once failed him. He carried a personal vendetta against injustice, but his anger often turned into a refusal to see nuance. If evidence was missing, he demanded to know why. If testimony was contradictory, he declared the system corrupt. While Riker's fury was aimed at the defendant, Hale's was aimed at the very machinery of justice itself. When deliberations began, their voices clashed like thunder. Riker slammed the table, declaring D4vd's guilt a foregone conclusion. "Look at the man," he barked. "Look at the way he sits there without flinching. That's not innocence, it's arrogance. He thinks he's smarter than all of us." Hale shot back, his voice trembling with a different kind of rage. "Or maybe he's tired of being judged before the truth comes out. I know what that feels like. You don't convict a man because you don't like his face." The other jurors watched, caught between 2 storms. Some leaned toward Riker's certainty, craving closure. Others sympathized with Hale's skepticism, wary of condemning a man without proof. But the louder their debate grew, the clearer it became. The verdict would not be born of evidence alone. It would be shaped by human passion, anger, and the fragile search for truth. Meanwhile, in the courtroom, the drama intensified. Witnesses faltered under cross-examination. A neighbor who claimed to have seen D4vd near the crime scene admitted she had poor eyesight. A police officer conceded that key evidence, a security tape, had been lost in the chain of custody. The defense hammered these inconsistencies, while the prosecution urged the jury to see the bigger picture, rather than get lost in details. The press outside fanned the flames. Tabloids splashed headlines like D4vd the killer, while social media erupted in hashtags declaring his innocence. Every day, the jurors returned home to a city already divided, only to re-enter the courtroom where their private doubts became public duty. For Riker and Hale, the trial became personal warfare. Riker accused Hale of weakness, of letting sympathy cloud his judgment. Hale accused Riker of bloodlust, of wanting a scapegoat rather than justice. Their arguments shook the room, dragging the other jurors into a cycle of persuasion and resistance. Some nights, the deliberation room echoed like a battlefield, long after the courthouse lights had dimmed. Long after the courthouse lights had dimmed. The judge sensed the tension but could do little. His gavel silenced lawyers, not jurors. He reminded them of their oath, their duty, their obligation to facts. But facts themselves seemed slippery, shaped by interpretation, twisted by anger, reshaped by doubt. As the weeks dragged on, the question loomed larger. Was D4vd guilty, or was he framed by a system too eager to close a case? The evidence refused to deliver certainty. What remained was the human storm raging inside the jury, a storm with two angry men at its eye. The trial was no longer just about the crime. It was about the meaning of justice itself. Could truth survive the weight of bias, anger, and human imperfection? Or would the verdict reflect not what had happened on that fateful night, but what the jurors chose to believe? As deliberations edged toward collapse, one thing became clear. The fate of D4vd would not be decided by evidence alone. It would be decided by which man, Riker or Hale, could bend the room to his will. And with every heated exchange, the question grew sharper, more haunting. Were they seeking justice or creating a tragedy? The final days of the D4vd trial carried the weight of a storm about to break. Reporters gathered before sunrise, cameras trained on the courthouse steps, waiting for the story that would dominate headlines. Inside, the air was suffocating with tension. Jurors shuffled into their seats, worn down by weeks of conflicting testimonies and heated debates. They were ordinary people, yet the world now looked to them as the arbiters of truth. The prosecution closed its case with fire. They asked the jury to see the bigger picture, to stitch together the fragments of evidence into a narrative of guilt. "This is not coincidence," the lead prosecutor declared. "This is a man who thought he could hide behind art and fame. But no mask can conceal the truth forever," the defense countered with icy precision. They reminded the jury of every gap, every contradiction, every missing piece. "You are being asked to convict on shadows," the attorney said. "But justice demands light. If there is doubt, and there is plenty, you cannot condemn." When the jurors retreated to deliberate, it was not silence that filled the room, but another eruption of anger. Thomas Riker slammed his fist onto the table, his voice like gravel. To him, D4vd was a manipulator, and letting him walk free was unthinkable. Marcus Hale, equally fierce, pushed back with the weight of his own scars, warning against the dangers of convicting on suspicion alone. Their arguments split the room, dragging others back and forth between certainty and doubt. Riker demanded justice for the victim. Hale demanded justice for the system itself. The clash between them was so consuming that the other jurors began to realize their decision was not about facts anymore. It was about which man's fury they could endure. After hours that stretched into an eternity, the jury returned. The judge asked if a verdict had been reached. The foreperson's voice shook as the paper was read aloud. "Not guilty!" Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Some cheered, others shouted in rage. Riker sat in disbelief, face flushed red with anger. Hale closed his eyes as though finally exhaling a breath he had held for years. And D4vd, silent as ever, remained unreadable. To some, his expression was relief. To others, it was triumph. The aftermath was chaos. Protesters filled the courthouse steps, divided into chants of outrage and cries of victory. Talk shows debated whether the jury had upheld justice or failed it. Families mourned without closure, and the public remained hungry for certainty that never came. D4vd walked free, but freedom did not erase suspicion. He became a symbol, a man forever balanced between innocence and guilt in the eyes of the world. Riker never forgave the verdict, calling it a miscarriage of justice. Hale defended it, insisting that doubt must outweigh anger, though even he admitted the truth might never be known. And that was the cruel legacy of the trial. Not resolution, but uncertainty. The victim's family was left with questions, the public was left with division, and D4vd was left to carry a shadow that no verdict could lift. Was he guilty? Was he framed? The trial ended without answering. What it left behind was something more unsettling, a mirror. It reflected the fragility of justice, the way anger and bias could tip the scales, the way humans search for certainty even when truth is slippery. The D4vd trial will be remembered not for the answers it gave, but for the question it left behind. A question that refuses to die, that refuses to die.